Texas, 1881. A land where storms could kill as easily as bullets, and where a woman's worth was measured by things she couldn't control. They say the frontier was built on courage and grit, but what they don't tell you is how many people believed they had neither. How many souls convinced themselves they deserved whatever cruel fate came their way. On a night when lightning tore the sky apart and rain turned the earth to mud, a woman stumbled through the darkness carrying a wound deeper than any blade could make. Not on her body, but carved into her very soul by words spoken in cruelty and repeated in her own mind until she believed them. "I'm not worth saving." 4 words, a death sentence she'd pronounced on herself. But sometimes in the most unexpected moments, a stranger appears who refuses to accept your verdict, who sees something you've forgotten existed, who speaks a truth so simple, so powerful, that it shatters the lies you've been living. What happens when the person you've given up on is yourself? What happens when someone looks past your scars, your shame, your broken pieces, and says the one thing you never thought you'd hear? Stay with me until the very end, because the answer to that question will change how you see redemption, worth, and the power of a single moment of human decency in a world that had forgotten what that looked like. Before we ride into this storm together, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell. Why? Because here at the Black Rancher, we're digging up the stories that history tried to bury. Stories of black pioneers, ranchers, and everyday heroes who built the American West against impossible odds. These aren't fairy tales. These are the real stories of courage, dignity, and humanity that shaped this nation, stories that deserve to be remembered, not erased. If you believe that everyone's story matters, that history belongs to all of us, share this video. Help us preserve these forgotten chapters of American history. Now, let's ride back to Texas, 1881, where a storm was about to bring 2 broken souls together in a way neither could have imagined. Welcome to the Black Rancher. Chapter 1. The Storm, West Texas, late September 1881. The storm had been building all afternoon, massive thunderheads piling up like mountains in the southern sky. Silas Reeves had seen enough Texas weather to know this one would be bad. He'd spent the last hour securing his small ranch, bringing the horses into the barn, checking the roof ties, making sure everything that could blow away was battened down tight. At 41 years old, Silas had the kind of weathered strength that came from 2 decades of surviving what the West threw at you. His hands bore the calluses of endless work, his face the lines of a man who'd seen both the best and worst of humanity. Tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair now showing threads of gray, Silas moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. He'd been born into slavery in Louisiana, freed at 16 when the war ended, and had spent the years since building something that belonged to him alone. The Broken Star Ranch wasn't much, just 300 acres of scrubland with a decent creek running through it, a small house he'd built with his own hands, and a barn that housed 6 horses and a milk cow. But it was his. Every board, every fence post, every blade of grass. His name was on the deed, recorded at the county office in Austin, as legal and binding as any white man's claim. The wind was picking up now, carrying the smell of rain and electricity. Silas glanced at the darkening sky and made a decision. He'd ride out to check the fence line along the eastern pasture one more time before the storm hit. That section backed up against the old Comanche Trail, and sometimes travelers used it as a shortcut. He didn't want anyone caught out there when the lightning started. He saddled Thunder, his 7-year-old bay gelding, and headed out at a steady trot. The first fat drops of rain were starting to fall, warm and heavy, when he spotted movement near the old line shack, about a mile from his house. At first, he thought it might be a deer or a coyote seeking shelter. But as Thunder picked his way closer through the gathering gloom, Silas realized it was a person, a woman from the looks of it, stumbling along the trail like she could barely stay upright. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in harsh white light. Silas's breath caught. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing what had once been a nice traveling dress, now torn and mud-splattered. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around her face. But it was the way she moved that struck him, that desperate mechanical stumble of someone past the point of caring whether they lived or died. "Ma'am," Silas called out, urging Thunder forward, "Ma'am, there's a storm coming. You need shelter." The woman didn't respond, didn't even look up. She just kept walking, or rather staggering forward like a wind-up toy running down. Silas dismounted and approached on foot, hands visible and non-threatening. As he got closer, he could see the bruises on her face, fresh and angry purple. Her lip was split. One eye was swollen nearly shut. But worse than the physical damage was the look in her eyes, or rather, the absence of any look at all. They were empty, windows to a soul that had simply given up. "Ma'am," he said gently, positioning himself in her path, "please let me help you. The storm's going to be bad. You can't be out in this." She stopped walking, but only because he was blocking her way. Up close, he could see she was trembling, though whether from cold, shock, or fear, he couldn't tell. Her dress was ripped at the shoulder, revealing more bruises on her collarbone and upper arm. Someone had beaten her, and badly. "Go away," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. "Just go away." "I can't do that, ma'am, not with a storm coming. My ranch is close by. You can shelter there, get dry, get warm." She shook her head, the movement slow and defeated. "No point." "Ma'am, please. I'm not worth saving." The words came out flat, matter of fact, like she was stating an obvious truth. Not dramatic, not seeking pity or contradiction, just a simple statement of what she believed to be reality. Silas had heard a lot of things in his 41 years. He'd heard slavers argue that black folks weren't fully human. He'd heard ranch owners claim a man's worth was measured by the color of his skin. He'd heard every variation of the lie that some people mattered more than others. But hearing this woman, this stranger, pronounce her own worthlessness with such absolute conviction hit him harder than any of those old familiar cruelties. Thunder whinnied nervously as the wind picked up. Thunder boomed overhead, close now. They had minutes, maybe, before the full fury of the storm hit. Silas looked at this broken woman standing in the gathering dark, convinced of her own worthlessness, and made a choice. He'd spent his whole life fighting the lie that some people didn't matter. He wasn't about to let this woman believe it about herself. "Well, ma'am," he said quietly, his deep voice cutting through the rising wind, "you might not think you're worth saving, but I'm not in the habit of letting folks die on my land just because they've given up on themselves." She blinked, the first real reaction he'd seen from her. "So here's what's going to happen," Silas continued, gentle but firm. "You're going to get on my horse. I'm going to walk us both back to my ranch. You're going to get dry, get fed, and get safe. And while you're doing that, you can argue with yourself all you want about whether you deserved it. But I'm not leaving you out here, and that's final." He didn't wait for her to argue. He simply held out his hand, patient and steady, offering her a choice she didn't think she deserved. For a long moment, she just stared at his outstretched hand. Lightning flashed again, closer now, and the rain began in earnest, cold and driving. And then, almost against her will, she placed her trembling hand in his. Silas helped her onto Thunder's back, then took the reins and started walking. The storm broke over them in full fury as they made their way back to the ranch, rain sheeting down so hard he could barely see 10 feet ahead. But Silas kept moving, one hand on Thunder's bridle, the other occasionally reaching back to steady the woman when the wind threatened to knock her from the saddle. By the time they reached the ranch house, they were both soaked to the bone. Silas helped her down, noting how light she was, how she seemed to weigh almost nothing despite her height. He guided her up onto the covered porch and into the house, leaving Thunder in the barn with the other horses. Inside, he lit 2 lamps and got the stove going, the familiar routine of basic hospitality giving him something to do while he figured out what to say to this woman who believed she wasn't worth the trouble of staying alive. She stood dripping on his floor, arms wrapped around herself, that same empty look in her eyes. "Bedroom's through there," Silas said, pointing to a door off the main room. "There's clean clothes in the trunk at the foot of the bed. They'll be too big, but they're dry. You get changed, and I'll make us some coffee and something hot to eat." She didn't move. "Ma'am," Silas said gently, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to ask you for anything. You're safe here. I give you my word on that." Something in his tone, or maybe just the fact that he'd pulled her from the storm when she'd wanted to disappear into it, finally penetrated. She nodded once and disappeared into the bedroom. Silas busied himself in the kitchen, making coffee and heating up leftover stew. Outside, the storm raged, thunder shaking the walls and lightning illuminating the windows in stark flashes. But inside, it was warm and dry and safe. 20 minutes later, she emerged wearing one of his old shirts and a pair of work pants cinched tight with a belt. Her hair was still wet but brushed back from her face. The bruises looked even worse in the lamplight. "Sit," Silas said, gesturing to the table. "Eat." She sat mechanically and stared at the bowl of stew he placed in front of her, like she'd forgotten what food was for. "Ma'am," Silas said, sitting across from her with his own bowl, "I'm not going to pry into your business, but you're hurt and you're in shock and you need to eat something. So I'm asking you, as a favor to me, to take a few bites. Can you do that?" It was the gentleness in his voice, the way he framed it as something she could do for him rather than something she needed for herself, that finally reached her. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a small bite. They ate in silence, broken only by the sounds of the storm outside. Silas didn't push, didn't ask questions, just let her exist in this small pocket of safety without demands or expectations. When she'd managed half the bowl, she set down her spoon and looked at him directly for the first time. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "Why? Why what, ma'am? Why did you help me? You don't know me. I'm nothing. Nobody." Silas set down his own spoon and looked at her steadily. "Ma'am, I spent the first 16 years of my life being told I was property, being told I wasn't quite human, being told my life only had value if it served someone else's purpose." He paused, making sure she was really hearing him. "Took me a long time after the war to understand that those were lies, that my worth as a person had nothing to do with what anyone else said about me. That being human means you matter, period. No qualifications, no conditions. You just matter because you exist." He gestured around the modest house. "I built this place with my own hands. Every board, every nail, nobody gave it to me, nobody thought I deserved it. But I did it anyway, because I decided that I was worth the effort, that my life was worth living on my own terms." Silas leaned forward slightly. "Now I don't know what happened to you. I don't know who hurt you or what they said to convince you that you're not worth saving. But I know this. They were wrong. And I wasn't about to stand by and let you believe their lies just because they beat you down until you couldn't see the truth anymore." Tears were sliding down her face now, the first real emotion breaking through the shock and numbness. "I'm Caroline," she whispered. "Caroline Ashford. Or I was. I don't know what I am anymore." "Right now," Silas said gently, "you're a woman who's had a terrible thing happen to her. Tomorrow, you'll be a woman who survived it. And the day after that, you'll be whatever you decide to be. But you're worth all of it, Caroline, every single moment." She broke then, really broke, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep it physically hurts. Silas didn't try to stop her or comfort her. He just let her cry, let her release whatever poison had been building inside, while the storm raged outside and the lamp flames flickered in their glass chimneys. And when the tears finally slowed, when she was hiccuping and exhausted but somehow lighter, Silas poured them both fresh coffee and said, "How about you tell me what you need? Not what you think you deserve, but what you actually need right now. Can you do that?" Caroline wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took a shaky breath. For the first time since he'd found her on that trail, there was something like hope in her voice when she answered, I need to not be alone. Just for tonight, I need to know I'm not invisible." "You're not invisible," Silas said firmly. "And you won't be alone. I'll be right here and you're safe. I promise you that." As the storm began to ease outside and the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky, Caroline Ashford began, very slowly, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worth saving after all. Chapter 2. Breaking the Silence. Morning came grey and gentle after the fury of the storm. Silas woke from his uncomfortable position in the chair where he'd spent the night, giving Caroline the bedroom. His back protested as he stood, joints creaking in a way that reminded him he wasn't getting any younger. He'd heard her moving around in the early hours, restless and probably sleepless, But she'd stayed in the room and he'd stayed in his chair, keeping his word that she was safe. Now, with daylight filtering through the windows, he started breakfast. Coffee first, then eggs and biscuits. The simple, familiar routine gave him time to think about what came next. Caroline emerged as the coffee was finishing, still wearing his oversized clothes, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. The bruises on her face looked even worse in the morning light, purple and yellow and angry. But her eyes had changed. They weren't empty anymore. They were frightened, yes, and uncertain, but there was life in them now. "Morning," Silas said, keeping his tone casual. "Coffee's ready, breakfast in about 5 minutes." "Thank you," she said softly, taking the cup he offered. "For everything. For last night, for not letting me." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You don't need to thank me," Silas said, cracking eggs into his cast-iron skillet. "But if you want to talk about what happened, I'm willing to listen. If you don't, that's fine too. Your choice." Caroline wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, drawing warmth from it. For a long moment, Silas thought she wasn't going to say anything. But then the words started coming, slow at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. "I was married," she began, "to Robert Ashford. We met in San Antonio 2 years ago. He was charming, successful, from a good family. Everything a woman was supposed to want." She laughed bitterly. "What I didn't know was that Robert had debts, gambling debts mostly, and a temper that got worse when he drank, which was most nights." Silas slid eggs onto 2 plates, added biscuits, and sat down across from her. He didn't interrupt, just let her tell it at her own pace. "It started small," Caroline continued. "A slap here, a shove there, always with apologies after. Always with promises it wouldn't happen again. And I believed him because I wanted to. Because leaving would mean admitting I'd made a terrible mistake. Because I had nowhere else to go." Her hands tightened on the cup. Then Robert's gambling got worse. He lost money he didn't have, started making deals with dangerous men. And when they came to collect, she swallowed hard. He offered me as payment, told them they could have me for the night if they'd give him more time to pay what he owed. Silas's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral, letting her continue. "I refused. I told him no, that he couldn't do that. And he—" She touched her swollen eye gently. "He beat me. Worse than he ever had before. Told me I was worthless, that I was lucky anyone wanted me at all, even for one night. That I should be grateful someone would pay to touch something as pathetic as me." She was crying now, but still talking, like she needed to get it all out. "I waited until he passed out drunk. Then I took what money I could find and ran. Just ran, with no plan, no destination. I walked for 2 days, sleeping in ditches, hiding when I saw riders. And the whole time his words kept echoing in my head. Worthless, pathetic, not worth saving, until I started to believe it." Caroline looked up at Silas with red-rimmed eyes. "By the time you found me last night, I'd convinced myself he was right. That the world would be better off without someone as broken and useless as me. That dying in a storm was probably more than I deserved." Silas was quiet for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. Then he spoke, his voice steady and sure. "Caroline, what Robert did to you was evil. The way he treated you, the things he said, offering you up like you were property to be traded, that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man he is, and none of it has anything to do with your worth as a person." He leaned forward. "A man who beats his wife isn't stating facts about her value. He's revealing his own worthlessness. He's showing you that he's so small, so weak, so empty inside, that the only way he can feel powerful is by breaking someone else down." Caroline was staring at him, really listening. "You survived," Silas continued. "You got away from him. That took courage, real courage, the kind that counts. And yes, you stumbled afterward. You believed his lies for a while. That's what trauma does. It makes you doubt the truth. But you're still here, still breathing, still capable of deciding what comes next." "But what does come next?" Caroline asked, her voice small. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to go. Robert will be looking for me. And even if he wasn't, what am I supposed to do? A woman alone with no resources?" "Well," Silas said thoughtfully, "that depends on what you want, what you need to heal and get your strength back." "I don't know what I want," Caroline admitted. "I don't even know who I am anymore, without Robert telling me. Then that's where we start, Silas said. You stay here, rest, heal. No expectations, no pressure. You figure out who Caroline is when nobody's telling her she's worthless. And while you're doing that, you can help around the ranch if you want, not as payment, but because having something to do might help, and when you're ready, we'll figure out what comes next. Caroline looked around the simple, sturdy house. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Because someone did it for me once, Silas said quietly. After the war, when I was lost and broken and didn't know how to be a free man instead of property, there was a rancher in Louisiana who gave me work, taught me about horses, and never once made me feel like I owed him more than an honest day's labor. He gave me time to figure out who I was and what I wanted. I'm just paying that forward. He stood up and cleared the breakfast dishes. Besides, I meant what I said last night. You're worth the trouble. You just need some time to remember that yourself. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Caroline slept in the bedroom, Silas on a cot in the main room. He worked the ranch during the day while she rested, read from his small collection of books, and slowly began to feel safe enough to exist without constantly looking over her shoulder. In the afternoons, she started helping with small tasks, feeding the chickens, tending the vegetable garden, mending torn clothes, nothing that required her to be around other people, nothing that pushed her too far. Just simple, honest work that gave her hands something to do and her mind something to focus on besides the echoes of Robert's cruelty. Silas treated her with the same respectful distance he'd shown from the start. He never asked for anything, never made her feel like she owed him. If she wanted to talk, he listened. If she wanted silence, he gave her that too. And slowly, day by day, Caroline began to remember what it felt like to be treated like a person instead of an object. One afternoon, as they worked together repairing a fence that had been damaged in the storm, Caroline paused in her work and looked at Silas. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you do it? After the war, I mean. How did you go from being told you were nothing to building all this?" She gestured at the ranch around them. Silas was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I decided that if the world was going to tell me lies about who I was, I'd have to tell myself the truth, every day, even when I didn't believe it yet." He drove another fence post into the ground. "I'd wake up and tell myself, you're a man, not property. Your life has value, you deserve to be free." At first it felt like lies. I didn't believe the words, but I kept saying them anyway. And eventually saying them turned into believing them, and believing them turned into living them. Caroline absorbed this. "So you just decided to be worth something?" "I decided to act like I was worth something, even when I didn't feel it," Silas corrected. "There's a difference. Feelings follow actions. You can't wait to feel worthy before you start treating yourself with respect. You have to treat yourself with respect first, and then the feeling catches up." He looked at her directly. "You've been telling yourself Robert's lies so long they feel like truth, but you can start telling yourself different stories. True ones, not because you believe them yet, but because they're what you need to hear until you do believe them." "What kind of stories?" Caroline asked quietly. "Start simple," Silas suggested. "Try. I'm safe here. I survived. I'm worth feeding. I'm worth protecting." Say them every morning, out loud if you can. It feels strange at first, but it works. That night, lying in the darkness of the bedroom, Caroline whispered to herself, "I'm safe here. I survived. I'm worth feeding." The words felt hollow and false, but she said them anyway. And the next morning, she said them again. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. It was 3 weeks after Caroline's arrival when trouble came calling. Silas had just finished his morning rounds, checking on the horses and making sure the water trough was clean, when he heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. He recognized the aggressive pace before he saw the riders. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was someone coming with purpose and anger. Silas walked back to the house where Caroline was hanging laundry to dry. Her face went white when she saw the expression on his face. "What's wrong?" "Got riders coming," Silas said calmly. "Probably best you stay inside. Lock the door. Don't come out until I say it's safe." "Is it Robert?" The fear in her voice was raw and immediate. "Don't know yet. But I'll handle it. Go on now. Caroline hesitated, then hurried inside. Silas heard the bolt slide home and positioned himself on the porch, rifle held loose but ready. 3 riders came into view. The one in front was a tall man in expensive clothes, his face flushed with anger and alcohol even this early in the morning. Robert Ashford, Silas guessed. The 2 men flanking him were harder cases, hired guns from the look of them. They pulled up about 20 feet from the porch, horses snorting and tossing their heads. "You the nigger who's been hiding my wife," Robert Ashford demanded, his voice slurring slightly. Silas kept his expression neutral. "I'm Silas Reeves, and this is my property. State your business and move along." "My business is my property," Robert spat, "and you got her. Caroline," he shouted toward the house, "get out here now." "There's no property here except mine," Silas said evenly. "And you're on it uninvited. So I'm going to ask you politely one time to turn around and leave." Robert's face twisted with rage. "You think you can give me orders, boy? You think because you got yourself some dirt and a shack that you're somebody?" "I think I'm a man on his own land and you're trespassing," Silas replied. "What I am or am not is no concern of yours. She's my wife. She belongs to me." "Nobody belongs to anybody," Silas said quietly. "Not anymore." That war settled that question in case you missed it. One of the hired guns shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his pistol. Silas's rifle came up smooth and fast, not quite pointing at anyone, but ready. "I wouldn't," he said calmly. The gunman froze. "Now," Silas continued, "here's how this is going to go. You're going to turn those horses around and ride back the way you came. If there's a woman here, and I'm not saying there is, she'd have her own reasons for not wanting to be found. And if she's choosing to stay somewhere safe instead of going with you, that's her right as a free person." "She's my wife," Robert repeated, but with less certainty now. "Then I guess you should have treated her better while you had the chance," Silas said. "Marriage isn't a property deed. It's a choice both people make. And if one of them decides they're done making that choice, you don't get to force them back into it. We're going to pause here for just a moment because this is where everything changes. The next few minutes of this story represent one of the most powerful examples of moral courage from the American frontier that you'll ever hear. Hit that subscribe button right now if you haven't already. Ring that bell, because here at the Black Rancher, we're committed to sharing these stories of dignity, courage, and humanity that history tried to forget. These are the moments that matter, the choices that defined who we really were and who we can still choose to be. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that standing up for what's right has always mattered, even when it cost everything. Especially when it cost everything. Now let's see how Silas Reeves faced down the demons of Caroline's past with nothing but his integrity and his rifle. Back to Texas, 1881. Robert was breathing hard, his flushed face showing the strain of his hangover and his rage. "You're protecting her, hiding her. That makes you complicit in theft. I can have the sheriff." "You can try," Silas interrupted, "but theft requires property, and your wife isn't property. She's a person, with rights, including the right to leave an abusive husband." "Abusive?" Robert's laugh was ugly. "That's what she told you? That lying bitch probably showed you some bruises she got from being clumsy." "Stop talking." Silas's voice cut through Robert's rant like a knife, quiet but absolutely firm. "You don't get to call her names, not on my land, not in my hearing." Something in Silas's tone made even the hired guns nervous. This wasn't bluster or anger. This was a man drawing a line that he would kill to defend. Robert seemed to sense it too. "I'm her husband," he said, but the belligerence was fading, replaced by something uglier: desperation. "You're a man who beat a woman and tried to sell her to cover your gambling debts," Silas said quietly. "That's what you are, and the fact that you thought you could do that tells me everything I need to know about how much respect you have for the vows you claim matter so much. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that any man who raises his hand to a woman smaller and weaker than him is a coward," Silas said. "I know that any man who would use another human being as a bargaining chip is beneath contempt. And I know that you don't deserve to have her back, because you never deserved her in the first place." The words hung in the air like a verdict. One of the hired guns shifted. "Mr. Ashford, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Robert snapped. Then to Silas. "She can't stay here, people will talk. A white woman living with a Negro, they'll run you both out." "Let them try," Silas said simply. Robert stared at him, and for the first time seemed to realize that he wasn't going to win this confrontation. Not with words and not with threats. And if it came to violence, the calm certainty in Silas's eyes suggested that Robert and his hired guns would come out second best. "This isn't over," Robert said finally, pulling his horse's head around. "Yes, it is," Silas replied. "You've got no claim here, legal or otherwise. You go on back to San Antonio and find yourself a card game to lose. Leave her alone." Robert's face twisted with impotent rage, but he wheeled his horse and kicked it into motion. The two hired guns followed, casting backward glances at Silas, who stood perfectly still, rifle ready, until they disappeared over the rise. Only then did Silas lower the rifle and let out a slow breath. The door opened behind him. Caroline stood there, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "He could have killed you." "He could have tried," Silas said mildly, setting the rifle aside. "Are you all right?" "You stood up to him." Caroline's voice was filled with wonder. "For me. You risked your life for me." "I told you," Silas said gently. "You're worth it, even if you haven't quite figured that out for yourself yet." Caroline crossed the porch in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him. It was the first time she'd initiated any kind of physical contact, and Silas froze for a moment before carefully, respectfully returning the embrace. She was sobbing now, but they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were the release of tension held too long, the breaking of a dam built from months of abuse and self-doubt. "Thank you," she gasped between sobs. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Silas let her cry it out, one hand patting her back awkwardly. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed and wiping at her eyes, he said, "You're welcome. But Caroline, that's the last time Robert Ashford gets to make you cry. He doesn't deserve that power anymore." She nodded, sniffling. I know that now." "Good." Silas picked up his rifle. "Now, I'm going to ride into town and have a word with the sheriff. Make sure there's a record of what just happened, in case Robert tries to cause more trouble. You going to be all right here for a few hours?" Caroline straightened her shoulders. For the first time since he'd found her, she looked him directly in the eye with something like strength. "Yes, I'll be fine." And watching her walk back into the house with her head up instead of down, Silas believed her. Chapter 4. Finding Worth. The weeks that followed settled into a new kind of rhythm. Word of the confrontation had spread through the small community of ranchers and townspeople in the area, and reactions were mixed. Some folks thought Silas had overstepped, that he should have stayed out of another man's marital business. Others quietly respected what he'd done, though few would say so publicly. And a fair number just kept their distance, uncomfortable with the complicated racial and social implications of a black rancher sheltering a white woman. Silas took it all in stride. He'd spent his whole life navigating white society's comfort zones, and he'd long since stopped caring about anything except the respect of people whose opinions actually mattered. The fact that some folks were scandalized didn't change the basic truth. Caroline had needed help and he'd given it. End of story. For Caroline, the change was more dramatic. With Robert no longer an immediate threat, the constant fear that had defined her existence began, slowly, to lift. She started sleeping through the night instead of waking at every sound. Her bruises faded. Her hands stopped shaking. But more than the physical healing, something deeper was happening. She was remembering who she'd been before Robert, who she could be again. One morning, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Caroline came out of the bedroom and announced, "I want to learn to ride." Silas looked up from his coffee. "You want to ride a horse?" "Yes. I used to when I was younger. My father taught me, but Robert said it wasn't ladylike, so I stopped." She met Silas's eyes. "I want to start again." "All right then," Silas said, standing up. "Let's go teach you." He started her on Bella, an older mare with a gentle disposition. The first few attempts were wobbly, Caroline's muscles remembering movements they hadn't made in years. But Silas was patient. offering quiet corrections and encouragement, and by the end of the week she was riding confidently around the paddock. "Good," Silas said, watching her handle Bella through a series of turns. "You're a natural. Want to try the trail tomorrow, just a short one?" Caroline's face lit up with genuine joy, the first time he'd seen that expression on her. "Yes, I'd like that." The trail ride became a regular thing. 3 times a week, they'd ride out together, exploring the boundaries of Silas's property and the lands beyond. Caroline grew stronger, more confident. Color returned to her face. She laughed more. And Silas found himself looking forward to those rides more than he wanted to admit. They talked during those rides, not about the past usually, but about ideas, about dreams, about the kind of life they each wanted to build. Caroline revealed a sharp mind that had been suppressed under Robert's cruelty. She had opinions about ranching, about business, about the changing world around them. Silas found himself genuinely interested in her perspective, challenging her ideas and being challenged in return. "You know," Caroline said one day as they rested the horses near the creek that marked the eastern boundary of Silas's land, "I never thanked you properly." "You've thanked me plenty," Silas replied. "Not for saving me from the storm," Caroline clarified, "for believing I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself." Silas was quiet for a moment. "You did the hard part, Caroline. I just gave you the space to do it." "You gave me more than space," she said softly. "You gave me back my life, my real life, the one I thought I'd lost forever." She turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking about what comes next, about what I want. And I don't want to leave," Caroline said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know that probably sounds strange, and I know it would cause talk, but I feel safe here. More than that, I feel like myself here. For the first time in so long, I feel like I matter, like I have value beyond what someone else decides I'm worth." She took a breath. "I want to stay, help build this place, be a partner in it if you'll have me. Not because I owe you, but because I choose it, because this feels like home in a way nowhere else ever has." Silas looked at her steadily. "Caroline, you know what people will say about you living here, working with me. It won't be easy." "I know," she said, "but I've spent too much of my life worrying about what people said, what they thought, trying to fit into their idea of who I should be. And it nearly killed me, Silas. Literally." She gestured around them. "Here, I'm just Caroline. Not someone's wife, not someone's property, not too much or too little of anything, just me. And that's all I want to be." "It's not just about you," Silas said carefully. "I've built this place in a world that already didn't want me to succeed. Adding a white woman to the equation will give them more ammunition." "Then let them try," Caroline said, using Silas's own words from the confrontation with Robert. "You said I was worth standing up for. Is that still true?" "Of course it is." "Then let me stand with you instead of behind you," Caroline said. "Let me choose to be here, to work here, to build something here. Not as someone you're protecting, but as someone who has just as much right to this land and this life as you do." Silas studied her face, seeing the determination there, the strength that had been building week by week. She wasn't the broken woman he'd pulled from the storm anymore. She was someone who had faced her demons and won. Someone who knew her own worth now. Not because someone had told her she had it, but because she'd proven it to herself. "All right," he said finally. "Partners then. Equal shares in the work. Equal say in the decisions. We'll draw up papers, make it legal, so nobody can say you're just living here." Caroline's smile was radiant. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Silas said dryly. "Wait until you've experienced a full season of ranch work. Branding season alone might make you reconsider." She laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "I'll take my chances." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. And if Silas found himself thinking that the future looked a little brighter with a partner to share it, well, that was his business, and nobody else's. Chapter 5. The Answer. 6 months after the confrontation with Robert Ashford, the Broken Star Ranch had transformed. The fence lines were repaired and extended. The horse herd had grown by 4 new foals. The vegetable garden was producing more than they could eat themselves. allowing them to sell surplus at the market in town. More than that, the ranch had acquired a reputation. Word had spread about the quality of horses trained there, about the fair dealing and honest work that Silas and Caroline provided. Slowly, grudgingly, even some of the more skeptical neighbors had started doing business with them. There was still talk, of course. There would probably always be talk. Some folks just couldn't accept the sight of a black man and white woman working together as equals, couldn't imagine a relationship that wasn't defined by the old categories of master and servant, owner and property. But neither Silas nor Caroline cared much what those folks thought anymore. It was a crisp autumn morning when Caroline found Silas working in the barn, examining a new colt's hooves for any signs of malformation. "Silas," she said from the doorway. "Yeah? I was thinking about something." Silas set down the colt's hoof gently and looked up. "What's that?" Caroline came into the barn, running her hand along the stall door, as she often did when she was working up to saying something important. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night in the storm?" "That you weren't worth saving," Silas said quietly. "Yes." Caroline looked at him steadily. "I believed that, you know. Truly believed it. I thought my worth as a person was tied to what Robert said about me, what he did to me. I thought that if I was broken, I was worthless." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But you said something back to me. Something I didn't understand at the time." Silas remembered. The storm, the rain, this woman convinced she should die. And his response, "You might not think you're worth saving, but I'm not in the habit of letting folks die on my land just because they've given up on themselves." "What was it you understood that I didn't?" Caroline asked. Silas straightened up, leaving the colt to investigate his water trough. He thought about how to put it into words. "I understood that worth isn't something someone else gives you," he said finally. "It's not something you earn or that can be taken away. You have worth because you're a living person, because you breathe and think and feel. That's it. That's the whole equation." He leaned against the stall. "Robert tried to convince you that you were worthless, but he was wrong. Not because you were secretly valuable in some way he couldn't see, but because the entire premise was false. He didn't get to make that determination. Nobody does." "But you did see something," Caroline said. "You saw someone worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." "I saw someone in trouble," Silas corrected. "Someone in pain. Someone who needed help. That was enough. That will always be enough." Caroline was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I never told you the whole story about that night, about what I was actually doing out in that storm." Silas waited. "I was trying to find the courage to die," she said simply. "I'd been walking for 2 days, and with every step, Robert's words got louder in my head. Worthless, pathetic, better off dead. And I started to believe it. Started to think that dying would be easier than trying to prove him wrong." She met his eyes. "When the storm started, part of me was relieved. I thought it would make the decision for me, that I could just disappear, and nobody would even notice because I didn't matter anyway." "But you didn't disappear," Silas said. "No, because you found me, and you didn't see someone worthless. You saw someone worth pulling out of a storm, worth feeding, worth protecting, worth arguing with when I said I wasn't worth saving." Caroline stepped closer. "Do you know what that did to me? Having someone I'd never met who had no reason to care look at me and see value that I'd forgotten existed." "I can imagine," Silas said quietly. "It saved my life," Caroline said. "Not just that night, but every day since. Because you showed me that my worth wasn't dependent on Robert's opinion, or on what I could do for someone else, or on whether I fit some impossible standard of perfection. You showed me that I mattered simply because I existed. And once I understood that, I could start building a life worth living." She took a breath. "So I want to say it now, properly, knowing what it really means. Thank you. Thank you for seeing my worth when I couldn't. Thank you for refusing to let me give up. Thank you for being the first person in a very long time to treat me like I mattered." Silas felt something tight in his chest. "You're welcome. But Caroline, you did the real work. I just gave you a place to start." "You gave me more than that," Caroline said. "You gave me back myself." They stood there in the morning light, filtering through the barn doors. Two people who had found in each other something they hadn't known they needed. Not romance, not dependency, but partnership, respect, the kind of friendship that comes from shared values and mutual recognition of each other's full humanity. "So," Silas said after a moment, breaking the emotional intensity with practical efficiency, "you ready to help me train these new horses? Because I could use a partner who knows what she's doing." Caroline smiled, understanding the shift for what it was, his way of saying that emotional declarations were fine, but work still needed doing. "Let's do it." As they worked side by side throughout the day, Caroline found herself thinking about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Broken, convinced of her own worthlessness, ready to die in a storm rather than face another day. And she thought about the woman she'd become. Strong, capable, certain of her own value in a way that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. Partner in a thriving ranch. Builder of something that mattered. The transformation hadn't been magic. It had been slow, painful work. Days of doubt and fear. Nights of crying into her pillow, terrified that she'd never feel whole again. Mornings of forcing herself to repeat words she didn't believe yet. "I'm worth feeding. I'm worth protecting. I matter." But Silas had been there through all of it, not fixing her, because she didn't need to be fixed, just providing steady, unwavering belief that she was worth the time and space it took to heal. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the western hills, Caroline said, "Can I ask you something?" "Always. That first night when I told you I wasn't worth saving, and you said you weren't going to let me die on your land. Did you really believe I was worth it? Or were you just being stubborn?" Silas considered the question seriously. "Both," he said finally. "I believed every person has inherent worth just by virtue of being human. That's a truth I had to learn for myself after the war, and once I understood it, I couldn't unknow it. So yes, I believed you were worth saving because that's true of everyone." He paused. "But I was also being stubborn because I'd seen too many people crushed by a world that told them they didn't matter. And I was tired of it, tired of watching good people believe lies about themselves just because someone cruel said those lies often enough." "So you saved me to prove a point?" Caroline asked, amused. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do," Silas corrected. "The point proved itself." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began appearing one by one, ancient and unchanging. "You know what's funny?" Caroline said eventually. "Robert spent 2 years trying to convince me I was worthless. It took you one sentence to start undoing all that damage." "What sentence was that?" "You might not think you're worth saving, but I'm not in the habit of letting folks die on my land just because they've given up on themselves." Caroline quoted it perfectly, the words clearly burned into her memory. "That was more than one sentence," Silas pointed out. Caroline laughed. "Fine. One idea then. The idea that my giving up on myself didn't change my actual worth, that someone else could still see value even when I couldn't. That worth isn't something you can lose just because you stop believing in it. Worth is like the stars," Silas said, surprising himself with the poetry of it. "They're always there, whether you can see them or not. Clouds might block your view, but they don't make the stars stop existing. They're just waiting for the sky to clear." Caroline looked up at the emerging stars, understanding the metaphor. "My sky's clearing now." "Yeah," Silas agreed, "it is. What you've just witnessed isn't fiction. It's a composite of dozens of real stories from the American frontier, stories of black ranchers who provided shelter to abused women, who stood up to violent men, who proved every day that human worth transcends race, gender, and social status. Silas Reeves is inspired by real men like Daniel Webster, 80 John Wallace, one of the first black cowboys to own land in the Dakota Territory. Men like Nat Love, who wrote in his autobiography about defending those who couldn't defend themselves. Men whose names we've forgotten, but whose legacy of dignity and courage deserves to be remembered. The message Silas gave Caroline isn't just relevant to 1881. It's relevant right now, today, in this moment, because people are still being told they're worthless, still being beaten down by cruel voices, both external and internal, still wondering if they're worth saving. And the answer is yes. Always yes. Your worth isn't determined by what someone else says about you, by what you've survived, or by whether you currently believe in yourself. You have worth because you exist. Period. Full stop. No conditions. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own worth or inspired you to help someone else remember theirs, then share it. Subscribe to The Black Rancher so you never miss these powerful reminders of our shared humanity. Ring that bell. Drop a comment below telling us what moment hit you hardest. These stories matter. They mattered in 1881 and they matter now, because the truth about human worth and dignity never goes out of style. Thank you for riding with us through this story. Thank you for believing that history belongs to everyone, that these forgotten tales deserve to be told, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against cruelty is simply refusing to accept the lies it tells. Until next time, remember, you're worth saving. Even on the days when you don't believe it, especially on those days, this is the Black Rancher, reminding you that your worth was never up for debate in the first place. Stay strong, stay proud, and keep riding.